Foreign Secretary, are you optimistic that these children could come back? I mean, we're talking about an estimated at least 35,000 people from the ages of just not even a toddler to over 18-year-old.
Well, this is the brutal face of imperialism, this brainwashing, this behaviour. The world has stood up to imperialism and injustice before.
I'm Francis Dearnley, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, as China unveils new weapons at a huge military parade in Beijing, attended by Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un, we assess just how significant this gathering is and whether it has put the West on notice. Then we sit down for an exclusive interview with the British Foreign Secretary as the UK announces sanctions against those forcibly deporting, indoctrinating and militarising Ukrainian children.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Wednesday, the 3rd of September, 3 years and 193 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today, I'm joined by our Associate Editor of Defence, Dominic Nicholls, live in Prague, and later, Adélie Pojzman-Pontay, who sits down with Foreign Secretary David Lammy in the Foreign Office. But first, the latest military and political updates of the last 24 hours. Let's start in China and one of the largest displays of its military power and gatherings of its key allies for many years. And I'll talk you through the parade in a moment, but I want to start with the fact that North Korea's Kim Jong-un told Putin in their first ever face-to-face encounter at this summit that he will do everything he can to help Russia in Ukraine. The two leaders left the lunch reception hosted by President Xi for a one-on-one meeting where they discussed their alliance. Putin said Kim's soldiers had fought courageously and heroically alongside the Russians in their fight against modern Nazism, which the North Koreans said was its fraternal duty. Putin then invited Kim Jong-un to Russia. He said, "We're waiting for you. Come and visit us." Now, Pyongyang is reportedly planning to send another 6,000 more troops to Russia, likely to serve in supporting roles in the rear, according to South Korea's Yonhap news agency. They claim roughly 1,000 North Korean military engineers are already there in the rear front as reserve forces. Now, I think this encounter between the two leaders is noteworthy for several reasons. Obviously, that vital alliance for the Russians has been strengthened despite the heavy losses Pyongyang suffered in those encounters in Kursk. But more than that, the fact that the Chinese allowed that meeting to take place on their soil just underscores their tacit support of that relationship and the appearance of North Korean troops on European soil. An obvious point, but I wonder whether this would have been the case in, say, the first year of the war, when things were more febrile and the ramifications diplomatically of doing something like this would have been perceived as more severe. Now, raising a toast, the Chinese premier declared that the world must never return to the law of the jungle, where the strong prey on the weak. He urged nations to treat each other as equals in order to coexist in peace and eradicate the root cause of war. History cautions us that humanity rises and falls together, he said. The Chinese nation is the great nation that is never intimidated by any bullies. He then called for an acceleration in the building of a world-class military to safeguard Chinese interests, framing China's future as a new journey and a new era, warning that in today's world, humanity again has to choose between peace and war, as well as dialogue and confrontation. But insisted China remains committed to the path of peaceful development. And just on that, I would point you to tomorrow's episode where we'll be talking to our very own Sophia Yan, who's been doing an investigation into how China is funding the Russians and supporting their drone program. The Chinese people firmly stand on the right side of history, he concluded. Now, it's 30 degrees centigrade in Beijing, and that enormous procession through Tiananmen Square was a landmark display of firepower, if measured historically, comparable in atmosphere and philosophy, I'd argue, to Moscow's Victory Day parade in May. Overhead were 100 fighter jets, including the J-16 and J-20. On the ground, rows of Dongfeng short, medium, intermediate and intercontinental ballistic missiles. The underwater weapon formation featured both light and heavy torpedoes, while another segment showcased radar systems for anti-missile operations, allegedly capable of detecting stealth aircraft and missiles. 6 types of ground-to-air missiles were displayed alongside an anti-drone formation, equipped with artillery, laser and microwave weapons designed to disable and destroy enemy drones. Leading the foot processions was the Type 99, China's first mass-produced battle tank, followed by amphibious assault vehicles mounted with howitzer guns. Chinese state media commentators drew a contrast with the Second World War, claiming that whereas China then had inferior weapons, today it commands killer heavyweight weapons. And the whole thing concluded with the release of balloons and 80,000 doves. I shudder to think how they stored the poor things, but anyway. All of these events were held brilliantly, simply very well at a high level, Putin said afterwards. But Taiwan's president issued a pointed response, declaring that his country does not use guns to commemorate peace. He wrote that Taiwan remembers the lessons of history, sticks to the faith in freedom and democracy, and believes the equipment in hand is used to defend the country, not to invade and expand. Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council, which manages cross-strait policy, also challenged Beijing's narrative that the Chinese Communist Party formed the backbone of the resistance against Japan during the war. It countered that it was the people and military of the Republic of China, the official name of Taiwan, who had made countless sacrifices and contributions, ultimately achieving victory, whereas the Chinese communists sought only to expand and consolidate their own power and made no contribution to the war effort. Now, I should say that's probably stretching it, but many historians would argue that while the Chinese communists did contribute militarily against Japan, especially through guerrilla warfare and resistance in occupied areas, it was the nationalists who carried the main burden of the large-scale conventional fighting and casualties. The CCP's true achievement was to use the war years to expand its influence and prepare for the Civil War, which it won in 1949. Anyway, the optics of the parade have drawn the ire of many, including President Trump, who posted this on Truth Social. The big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive amount of support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help it secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader. Many Americans died in China's quest for victory and glory. I hope they are rightfully honoured and remembered for their bravery and sacrifice. May President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as they conspire against the United States of America. President Donald J. Trump. So a rather curious message given everything going on at the moment. In response, Kremlin aide Ushakov told Russian state TV that his statement was not without irony. I want to say that no one was plotting, no one was weaving anything, no conspiracies. In addition, I can say that everyone understands the role that the United States, the current administration of President Trump, and President Trump personally play in the current international situation. Now, just on Trump, who is now back in front of the cameras, he said yesterday again that he was very disappointed in Putin. Quote, "He and I always had a great relationship. Very disappointed." But no sign of any consequences of that disappointment, of course. Now, one final update from the diplomatic realm before we turn to the military updates. We discussed yesterday the meeting between Putin and Slovakia's Robert Fico, when I completely botched that Lyndon Johnson quote. Thanks to everyone who's written in to point it out. You all knew what I meant. Anyway, we now know more from that meeting, where Putin told Fico that Russia has never opposed Ukraine joining the EU, although Russia remains opposed to Ukraine joining NATO. No surprises there. Putin reiterated his claim that the Western-backed coup in Ukraine in 2014 provoked Russia to invade Ukraine in 2014 and 2022, and denied that Russia has any future plans to attack another European country. He also suggested Russia could be open to operating the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant with the US and Ukraine in the future if favourable circumstances arise. As I say, nothing new, but I do think it's safe to assume this is designed to signal something to the United States and potentially to some countries in the EU who are warmer to the notion of some kind of peace deal being possible. Russia continues to feel the economic impacts of the secondary sanctions against Russian oil and gas importers, and of course the recent Ukrainian strikes against its oil refineries. Bloomberg reported yesterday that sources who received offers from Russian crude oil exporters state that Russian exporters are offering Urals crude to Indian importers at a discount of $3 to $4 per barrel, compared to Brent on a delivered basis for cargo shipments in late September to October 2025. Now, it's likely that discount is to try and ensure India continues to purchase crude from Russia despite Western secondary sanctions against India, including that 50% US tariff against Indian exports to the United States. Starting today, a new price cap on Russian oil has come into effect. The limit is now set at $47.6 per barrel instead of the previous $60. That's a decision adopted earlier as part of the EU's 18th sanctions package. Now, just on sanctions, as you'll hear in Adélie's interview with the British Foreign Secretary later, London has released new sanctions today, which target those supporting Putin's attempts to forcibly deport and indoctrinate Ukraine's children and erase their Ukrainian cultural heritage. We spoke previously about how this is becoming a larger issue now internationally. Ursula von der Leyen spoke about it in that meeting with Trump, and afterwards so did Trump in post, although admittedly not specifically on the Ukraine example, but the talk was about the issue of children. And so I do think that this should be seen in that context too, but much more on that later. Very important developments there, thankfully. But to end in the military realm, Russia launched a significant aerial attack against Ukraine last night, deploying 502 Shahed drones and decoys, as well as 24 cruise missiles. Ukraine's Air Force claimed this morning it successfully downed 430 of the 502 drones, as well as 21 of the 24 missiles. But the ones that weren't intercepted hit 14 different locations, and debris also caused several injuries. No deaths have been reported from this bombardment yet, but massive fires broke out in several regions across the country. On the front lines, nothing major to report today, though the ISW and others assessed that on the Kharkiv axis, Ukrainian forces recently advanced to the Volcha River in northwestern Vovchansk, northeast of Kharkiv city. Unconfirmed claims have Russian forces advancing near Kozacha Lopan, north of Kharkiv city. The spokesperson of a Ukrainian brigade operating in that oblast reported yesterday drone usage is intense in that area still, and Russian forces attack in small infantry groups of 3 to 5 soldiers using motorbikes. Apparently, Russian forces occasionally try to enter the Ukrainian rear, but Ukrainian drones are defending against Russian infiltration missions. The spokesperson reported Russian forces are constantly fielding improved unmanned systems, and their forces continue unsuccessful attempts to cross the Volcha River. Now, there are images circulating on social media this morning of a civilian on a bicycle in that sector hit by an FPV drone, killing him instantly. Down in Pokrovsk, Russian mill bloggers claim their forces advanced south of and within the city, north of Lientovichi, but this is contested for now. Perhaps the most significant development is a map displayed in Russia's Ministry of Defense on a wall behind Valery Gerasimov, Russia's top general. This came from a recorded military briefing that shows their objectives continue to be huge swathes of Ukraine. The territory outlined on the map not only includes the 4 regions Russia annexed in 2022, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson, of course, but also Mykolaiv and Odessa in the south. That video was released by the Russian Defense Ministry itself to state-run news sites, though it's been widely shared on Telegram since. It's hard to think this is not deliberate, both in what it's trying to signal, but also in its timing, with everything going on at the moment. So that's where we are with the military and political updates today. But let's go over to Dom now. Dom, I hope you can hear me okay. Where are you?
Well, hello, Francis. Hello, everyone. I'm currently perched outside the terminus of Metro Line A here in Prague. Just arrived in Prague for the Prague Defence Summit, organised by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the big global think tank. It's kicking off today for the next couple of days. Got here okay, although rather disappointingly, I then spent as long in the queue at border control as I had done in the air getting here from London. But anyway, got through that. It was all fine. A few people are going to be speaking over the next few days. We were expecting this afternoon to hear from the brand new head of the Royal Air Force, Chief of the Air Staff, Air Marshal Harve Smith. But he's had to cry off for some reason, which was actually, I got a pang of nostalgia, Francis. I've left the army, 10 years ago, and I was very used to hanging around waiting for the RAF, only for them to then not turn up. So it's quite delightful that it's still going on. But anyway, other people are speaking. Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, he's going to be here Thursday morning. I think that's going to be the keynote. I think that over all of this, as well as the current situation and Trump and what have you, is going to be that parade in China that you're leading on today. I take a slightly different view from a lot of the analysis that I've read this morning, saying that it shows Chinese military might and it's absolutely spectacular and look at all the weapons. I mean, yes, that's what parades are for. But I would point you to June's parade in Washington, D.C. with the US military in their parade for Donald Trump, which was an absolute shambles, if you remember it. It was a total cake and arse party. Nobody was in step, or very few people were in step. It was very poorly attended. It didn't look good at all. So don't take a military parade as the exemplar of the state of the military it represents or that it's drawn from, because that's simply not the case. I mean, the American military is a much more practice-honed and developed organisation than the Chinese military, I would venture. China, apart from that skirmish, it was very violent back with the border dispute with India, but hasn't actually fought a major war since 1979. So it was unpracticed, and especially unpracticed in all the latest gear that was on display, all the drones and all that kind of stuff that we saw. So, it's been a long time since they've rolled it all out and worked out what works. 1979, incidentally, as you'll remember, Francis, the year that Chaz and Dave released Gertcha, which is my second favourite song of all time. But anyway, so we don't know what the Chinese military is like. We saw some of their equipment in that very brief war, was it May, June, earlier this year, between India and Pakistan, where a lot of the Chinese supplied kit to Pakistan actually fared very well. And we think the Chinese aircraft and missiles shot down 5 Indian fighters. It was a bit of a wake-up call for India about where they're sourcing their military kit from. So, the Chinese kit that we've seen does seem to be very capable. The drones that we now know and we've seen in Ukraine, again, very capable. But, putting all that together in a big package and saying that they're a Premier League fighting force and Taiwan, you should better watch out, is another leap entirely. But I think that will dominate proceedings over the next few days. And we're going to be hearing from, because we're here in Czech Republic, Czechia. So we've got the Czech foreign minister. I'm not quite sure who's going to be the maid of honour tonight in the palace for the opening dinner. I'm hoping it's who, but we're not exactly sure. But there's a whole plethora of European and American, actually, military and political figures. So I'm going to be dialing in tomorrow and Friday. I'm going to hopefully grab some of these people on the side, straight out of the blocks. I've already been refused an interview with Mark Rutte. So there you go. That shows the draw that I can bring here. But I will try and grab some other people in the margins, Francis, and let you know what's going on.
Well, thanks very much, Dom, and we look forward to hearing from you over the rest of this week, as well as how much a pint costs in Prague these days. When I was last there it would have been about 2015, it was the equivalent of 40p a pint. Both delightful and dangerous, like all the best things. But Dom, thanks very much. We look forward to hearing from you later in the week.
But did you have to buy that pint, though, Francis?
I did. I was solo travelling. Anyway, it's not. That's enough for now.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
As Francis mentioned in his update, this morning the Foreign Secretary published a set of sanctions targeting 8 individuals and 3 Russian organizations involved in implementing Putin's systematic indoctrination and militarization of Ukrainian children. Those targeted by the sanctions are both in Russia and in the occupied territories. They include, for example, the Ahmad Kadyrov Foundation, which runs militaristic re-education programs for Ukrainian children. The president of the foundation, Aymani Nesyevna Kadyrova, is the mother of Kremlin-affiliated and Chechen strongman Ramzan Kadyrov. Both of them are now sanctioned by the UK. I sat down with Foreign Secretary David Lammy in an exclusive interview to discuss these new measures and what they mean for those living under Russian occupation and for the families waiting for their children to return. Foreign Secretary, thank you very much for having us today. We're very pleased to be here. This morning you announced a second round of sanctions targeting Russian individuals and organizations, perpetrators, in the deportation and Russification of Ukrainian children. What do these sanctions entail, and how did you decide who should be targeted?
Well, look, let's just step back and remind ourselves of the horrors of taking children from their home, putting them into camps and seeking to indoctrinate them, to militarize them away from their parents. It's a heinous crime. And of course, it evokes comparisons with the Nazi behavior during the Second World War. And in my 25 years in politics, I can only think back to the horrors of child soldiers in places like Sierra Leone as comparable in this modern period to this sort of evil. And that's why today we are sanctioning 8 individuals and 3 organizations affiliated with the Russian state. These include organizations such as Ahmad Kadyrov Foundation, which runs so-called re-education programs for these young people, and individuals like the president of the foundation, who's actually the mother of a sanctioned Kremlin-aligned Chechen strongman. We're sanctioning them and attempting to bear down on that crime that's taken 20,000 children. I sat with some of these children in Kyiv. I did that over a year ago. Heartbreaking stories. And of course, we can use our sanction regime both to issue travel bans, to freeze assets. And because we're the United Kingdom, we're obviously a G7 country with a huge economy, it sends a message into the system that's chilling. It's not just about having assets here in the UK. Other countries see what we've done, can either replicate what we've done, or indeed also raise red flags themselves in relation to these entities and individuals.
You've spoken just now about the militarization of these children. Some of them are also being put up for adoption. Their names are being changed. Their birthplaces are being changed in order to erase their Ukrainian origin. And experts have called out the systematic and genocidal nature of these actions. Would you call that a genocide? Is that what we're talking about here?
Well, let's be clear. This Russification harks back to the era of the Tsars. It harks back to the Stalin period. It harks back to periods in the 20th and the 19th century, in which language was denied, culture was denied, there were bans, books were burned. And today, in this post-Second World War era, where we have an international humanitarian law architecture, clearly these are horrendous acts that most right people thinking feel breaches international humanitarian law. Ultimately, it's for lawyers and the courts to determine issues like genocide, but I think it's patently clear that this egregious denial of rights for children, an attempt to deny them their culture and their origins, hark back to the worst kinds of behaviour. You'd have to go back to deep colonial behaviour, and is deeply, deeply offensive and deeply worrying.
I want to talk a little bit about the return of these children, because sanctions are very good, but how do we get these children back? I was just in Ukraine last month and I met with some of these families trying to get their children back home. So far, there's 1,300 children who've made it back. It's a very, very small number compared to the estimated 35,000 missing children. How do these sanctions support the return of children? And you took a first round of similar sanctions in November 2024, almost a year ago. Have these first sanctions brought any children home?
Well, let's be clear, we're not just using the tool of sanctions, although that's a powerful and important tool to have a chilling effect on those who are committing these crimes and to send powerful messages to other countries as well. We're also doing a lot on the ground with our financial clout to support the organisations working to retrieve these children. When I said that I sat in Kyiv with young people at Save Ukraine, the NGO working on the ground, it was with young children that had been got back because of that funding. Look, any child that is freed must be something we celebrate, but we obviously are deeply, deeply affected by the many thousands who we've not been able to bring back. I find it quite obscene, frankly, and I know that many of my other foreign ministers across Europe particularly find this obscene, that children could ever be a bargaining chip in any sort of negotiation, which is kind of the way that Putin would like to use these children. That's the other reason why he's committing this horrendous crime. And I was very pleased that this issue was raised with President Trump. I know that our Prime Minister has been very concerned about this, and as Trump sat with European leaders, I know that this was a topic of conversation, and it's a topic that both Madam Zelensky has taken up, but also actually that the First Lady in the United States has also taken up. So I'm resistant to any suggestion that there should be a bargaining chip. We've got to do everything we can to retrieve these children. We've got everything we can to put the spotlight on the fact that this is happening. Because, the truth is this offends parents and people wherever they are in the globe, because it's just such a horrendous thing to do. And I don't know if enough is understood that this is going on. So it's also a message that it's important, and I will be saying more about this when we get to the UN General Assembly in New York in a few weeks' time. I think it's also important that countries in the global south who might not have heard as much about this are aware that this has been going on.
Part of returning those children happened through back-channel diplomacy with third-party states such as Qatar, the Vatican, South Africa. Why is the UK not one of the negotiators?
Well, countries like Qatar and obviously the Vatican are countries with strong mediation track records. We are also in the United Kingdom a country that's done a lot on conflict resolution. But let's be clear, I don't think anyone would say that we are an honest broker in relation to Ukraine and Russia. We're not. Yeah. We are categorically, fundamentally on the side of Ukraine, standing up to this brutal imperialism against Putin. So I don't want to pretend that there's an equivocation here for the United Kingdom. The role that we play is using powerful tools like sanctions and financial instruments, understanding that The City of London is obviously probably the world's most great financial centre. It's through the military might and support that we give to Ukraine's military endeavour. It's through the finances that we can give to Ukrainian people and the humanitarians, and a lot of development aid that we give, of course, to Ukraine, billions that we have supported Ukraine with. That's what we can do, and it's standing with Ukraine and being their first friend, frankly, in the world. And I'm hugely grateful for the work I'm able to do with my counterpart in Ukraine. And I know the Prime Minister values his relationship with President Zelensky.
You speak about funding and financial support. One of the organizations that is most well known when it comes to tracking these children is the Humanitarian Research Lab at Yale University. Their funding was cut by the Trump administration earlier this year. We know from our reporting that they've been in contact with the Foreign Office about help in funding their operations, and that your department has refused. Why is that?
Well, look, we work very closely, obviously, with the government of Ukraine and with the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission particularly. I'm very aware of the work that the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab provided to Ukraine, very valuable work. And of course, there have been significant issues globally as a result of the withdrawal of funding of USAID. We've always been clear that we would not be able to financially step in and, if you like, fill that gap that has been pervaded by USAID. We're at the moment making judgments going forward. It's important to say that notwithstanding the changes that we also have made in development spend, Ukraine remains one of our top priorities in terms of development aid, and we are making assessments at the moment. So I don't rule out being able to support some of this work in the months and years ahead. But in terms of the work that and the support that was given by USAID, we're not able to fill that gap completely.
When you say support some of this work in the future, is it specifically the Yale lab, or would that be more with the Ukrainian government specifically?
Well, it's ensuring, in the end, it's never about one particular organisation. It is about the research, the methodology, and seeking to bring this to an end. So it may be, because I know the Yale Humanitarian Lab is a very good organisation, so I don't want to say specifically, but I do want to say that this work must continue. We're already funding this work. Can we do more? Will we do more? Well, I suspect we probably will. But truthfully, I'd like us not to have to do this, because these young people had come back and were able then to get justice.
Are you optimistic that these children could come back? I mean, we're talking about an estimated at least 35,000 people from the ages of just not even a toddler to over 18-year-old. We don't know where all of these children are. They're moved to different locations. In the meantime, they're being brainwashed by Russia. Are you optimistic they could come back, and will Ukraine see its children back?
Well, this is the brutal face of imperialism, this brainwashing, this behaviour. The world has stood up to imperialism and injustice before. I'm sitting here as the descendant of enslaved people. Hundreds of years ago, terrible things were done. One can't quite believe that today there are still children being trafficked. And of course, this is a type of child trafficking, effectively, is what it is. So I'm an optimist by virtue of the history of my own ethnic background. I have to be. And I remain steadfast in our commitment to bring this evil to an end. There are these chilling stories in atrocities of missing people who are never found, people who are never retrieved, families who never get that sense of closure. And it's my sincere hope that no family is left in this position when this war does finally come to an end. But of course, none of us can say for sure. That's why it's such a heinous crime.
At the moment, and you've spoken about this at the beginning of this conversation, Russia is militarising children from some as young as the age of 6, but also very much targeting older teenagers, young men. And Andriy Yermak, Zelensky's chief of staff, said in July that Now, these men, when they turn 18, they're being conscripted in the Russian army. That's something that has become clear in recent months. Now, no country raises an entire new generation with such a military mindset and military skills with innocent goals in mind. It says something about what Russia sees in its future for decades to come. Are we ready to face such a militarized Russia so deeply and for such a long time ahead?
Oh, look, here in the United Kingdom, absolutely yes. We will always stand up to tyranny. We will always stand up for those who are being oppressed or are being challenged. That's why we have stood with the Ukrainians right from the beginning, and why actually today here in the United Kingdom, this is a cross-party issue. It's not political. All political parties stand with Ukraine, and that has prevailed. And public support for Ukraine, we're standing in the wake of Ukrainian flags flying here in Whitehall, because that is the nature of the public support that exists here for Ukraine and our ability to stand up to Putin. And of course, let's be clear, NATO combined has the expertise, has the funds, has the military might, and of course the UK, particularly as a nuclear power, plays a very important role within NATO. That's the first thing. Second, we in our country here in the United Kingdom, we're the sixth biggest development spender in the world, and Ukraine is our top priority in terms of much of that aid. And we have in the Five Eyes system, alongside of course the United States and others, we have a tremendous intelligence capability, which is why the United Kingdom led the world in warning the world that Putin was about to invade, when many in Europe said, no, he won't do this can't happen. So look, of course we will be there right to the end, standing with Ukraine, evoking the sort of Churchillian spirit that exists in this country. We must be. And the reason for that is because Putin will not stop with Ukraine. Just speak to our friends in the Baltics. This desire will continue to rebuild, if you like, the old Soviet Union. And we must stand up to that tyranny. We must stand up for freedom, because in the end, that's what he's against. He's against self-determination, the people of Ukraine to choose a future that's about freedom, that's about democracy, that's about a way of life that is part, if you like, of that Western European family. That is what he is against. And of course, we all have to stand up to that.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Dom Nicholls and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine Live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells, and David Knowles.
My name is David Knowles. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.